And one of the really interesting things that they showed in this documentary is the parts of the brain that are triggered by estrogen and testosterone. And they also showed a female brain versus a male brain, although both brains need estrogen and testosterone. And I had always thought about estrogen and progesterone and testosterone as hormones that have to do, I guess, mostly with the sex organs, which is not true because testosterone has to do also with muscle recovery. Anyway, but I had never thought of them as brain chemicals. Hold up, y'all. I learned some stuff this week that completely changed how I think about perimenopause and hormonal changes in general. So that's up on this episode 78 of the Harness the Power of Planning podcast. And then I go into the why and the how to review your month, as well as set up your month, because as you know, we say around here, planning makes everything possible. So join me for the podcast starting now. Hello, hello, hello. Happy Halloween. So happy to be here with you. It is Thursday at 9:30 and I am having technical difficulties getting onto Instagram. So we'll see what happens there. Hopefully that has been resolved. I don't know. I guess it might just not be happening there. So I am Alegre, one half of Beyond Your Wildest Dreams, or BYWD. And today is Halloween, hence my unicorn onesie, because honestly, there are not enough days in the year to wear this unicorn onesie. I love wearing it. And I actually, for those of you who follow me on my personal Instagram, you might know that I shoot for 50 sunrise hikes every year. 30 50 would be amazing. 30 sunrise hikes every year. And today it was cold enough that I got to wear this. So that was super fun. So, so happy to be here with you. And as usual, I talk about 2 topics every Thursday. And the first half of this live is going to be about the newest things that I've learned with regards to hormonal changes. You can call it perimenopause, you can call it menopause, you can call it ovarian failure. Whatever it is, it has to do with the fact that at some point in your life, your hormones start to change, men and women, by the way. But I'm mostly going to talk about my experience as a woman. However, we age. And as you age, things change. So I'm going to talk about that in the first part because, as you know, as we say around here all the time, self-care is healthcare. And if you are not paying attention to these hormonal shifts, which are far more wide-reaching than I had previously understood until this week, and I'll tell you all about that. If you're not paying attention, then you are missing lots of opportunities to take care of yourself. So that's why we're talking about it. Then we're going to go into the why and the how to review your month. I'm actually going to walk you through a process that we have. And if you want to get this handout, actually, I will put up the link so you can grab it right now if you want it. And also, for those of you who are listening to this recorded later, we do put this up as the Harness the Power of Planning podcast. And you can download this document that I'm holding up here, this 2-page, it's 2-sided, 1-page document at tinyurl.com/BYWD course correct. So I'm going to talk about the why and the how to do a monthly course correct, as well as a little bit about setting up your month. Because studies have been shown that humans, we are more optimistic about tomorrow than we are about today, which is why it's great to take the time to set up your month from this optimistic point of view. But also, it's a great way to lower anxiety about the future because now you know what's happening. Now you know what you have going on, and you can sort of mentally do the calculations either consciously or unconsciously to prepare yourself for whatever it is that you have coming up. So I'm going to talk about those things. If you're joining me for the first time, welcome. Here at Beyond Your Wildest Dreams, we are all about helping you harness the power of planning to prioritize yourself and your goals. Because with planning, everything is easier and everything is possible. And we really believe that when you harness the power of planning, you can live a life beyond your wildest dreams. And no matter where you're watching right now, feel free to comment in the chat. And thank you, Brandon on the go. He's Brandon on the go said he was thinking about dressing up as a band-aid for Halloween, but then he decided it'd be hard to pull off. But bum. Thank you, Brandon. Have a spectacular day yourself. So wherever you are watching, feel free to comment. If you are watching to the recording, feel free to comment. We do read those. But if you are joining us for the first time, we have written these 4 workbooks that are all designed to help you harness the power of planning to prioritize yourself and your goals. And you can get those, at our website, bywdreams.com. But so, as I mentioned, I'm going to start today talking about hormonal changes because I've talked about this a lot. I am approximately in year 9 of perimenopause. And how do I know? Well, I know because after years of having a very regular period, about 9 years ago, I went from 12 to 11 periods. And then the next year, 11 to 10, and then 10 to 9. And it just kind of kept going like that until about 3 years ago when I jumped from 5 to 3. And then this year, 2024, I have only had 1 menstrual cycle. Now, my hormones were probably starting to decrease long before I started losing periods. And, it's a gradual thing. And one author whose book I highly recommend, I will pop it up here. It's called The New Menopause. She actually used a term that I had never heard before, which is describing menopause as ovarian failure. And just talking about the fact that our ovaries have a expiration date, if you will. However, we are living long beyond that expiration date. However, the reality is that the hormones that are created by our ovaries have much wider ranging effects to our body than I had any idea of. Okay. So, as I said, I started about 9 years ago losing periods. But then about 3 years ago, I started having some of the other common symptoms. And by the way, men, and I said this to my husband, I said, honey, I've been working on really educating myself about how my body is changing as I'm aging. I think you should do the same because one of the things that I've learned is that, and we probably all intuit it, but right, men's hormones also change as they age. And this past weekend, I saw a documentary, which I know is playing on PBS. You can probably find it other places. It's called The M Factor. And one of the really interesting things that they showed in this documentary is the parts of the brain that are triggered by estrogen and testosterone. And they also showed a female brain versus a male brain, although both brains need estrogen and testosterone. And I had always thought about estrogen and progesterone and testosterone as hormones that have to do, I guess, mostly with the sex organs, which is not true because testosterone has to do also with muscle recovery. Anyway, but I had never thought of them as brain chemicals. And if you've listened to us before, then you know that we're huge brain science nerds. And I have noticed, especially the last year, that it seems to take me a little bit longer to think of the perfect word. I don't know if anyone else notices, but I am definitely sort of noticing myself as I'm talking. Oh, it's taking me like a microsecond longer, but it's definitely noticeable to me. So, about 3 years ago, as I mentioned, I started having more symptoms, sort of the stereotypical symptoms one hears about with perimenopause and menopause. And that includes, I wouldn't call them hot flashes because it wasn't super hot. It's like I wasn't sweating. I also wasn't, there was actually a meme recently in a perimenopause group that I'm in of a woman who was literally steaming because she was watching a football game outside and you could see no one else around her was steaming. She was steaming. So I can't say that I've ever had that experience, but I was definitely warmer. And I am the person in the house who was always cold, who was always putting on an extra layer. And about 3 years ago, I noticed that I'm warmer. And I also started having one of the other really typical perimenopause symptoms, which is waking up in the middle of the night. And not just waking up in the middle of the night, but waking up in the middle of the night and not being able to go back to sleep, which is so challenging. So I just popped up this book, The New Menopause. I highly recommend it. And if you are listening to the Harness the Power of Planning podcast, I'll put the links in the show notes. But the other book that I highly recommend is called The XX Brain. These two books I feel like are musts for women approaching 40. If you're approaching 40, do yourself a favor and read these books and become familiar with all the symptoms that you might start experiencing that you would never think are related to hormone changes. So as I said, about 3 years ago, I started experiencing these other obvious signs, right? The feeling warmer, the waking up in the middle of the night. But now I'm learning from these two books that things like frozen shoulder, which if you've been listening to me all of 2024, I have been working on trying to open up, particularly my right shoulder is so much more frozen than my left shoulder, and it's really gotten bad the last 2 or 3 years. Apparently, frozen shoulder is related to hormone changes. What? Also, apparently, hormonal changes can trigger autoimmune diseases, lots of bone and joint challenges. Of course, acne, that's another one, probably excess hair or thinning hair are other ones, definitely visceral belly fat. Okay, so they're all of these symptoms, and when she listed the number of symptoms and it was in the book, The New Menopause, where she listed all of these symptoms. I was shocked because it really does kind of read like a laundry list of, right, lower energy, brain fog, um, changes in body composition. So my huge shift in hormones seems to have started around 3 or 4 years ago. And the thing was I might have recognized it as hormonal changes if my father hadn't died and COVID hadn't hit. Because COVID and my dad dying sort of, threw me for a loop in terms of my energy level. And yes, I was more tired, but I was also grieving. So I didn't necessarily recognize the potential hormonal shifts there. And so after seeing this documentary, again, the documentary is called The M Factor. I highly recommend it. It's free, just Google it, you'll find it. Highly recommend The M Factor. After watching that and after reading this book, The New Menopause, I can tell you that I am definitely going. By the way, you can find both of these books and also all these supplements that I take, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second, if you go to tinyurl.com/BYWD menopause, because I have been essentially symptom free since starting an herbal treatment that I started about 3 years ago with this one single ingredient herb called Vitex, which was recommended from this book called What Your Doctor Will Not Tell You About Menopause. And that book is really old. In fact, I mean, I bought the book about 15 years ago and the author had already passed many years before that, so it's an old book. But the one nugget I got from that book was this herb Vitex. It's a single ingredient herb. It's in the URL below. There's like 12 things that I've put in that little store, tinyurl.com/BYWD menopause. And these things have really helped me deal with my symptoms of hormonal changes. So when I started experiencing the waking up in the middle of the night and the hot flashes, I started taking Vitex. The recommended dose in the formulation that I bought was 2 a day. I felt like that was a little too much because of, let's say, viscosity changes that I was like, that's a little uncomfortable. I think I'm gonna dial it back. Now, you might like the viscosity changes. So, because I do know that, dryness in all parts of the body are definitely definitely increase with hormonal changes. So, it was a little bit much for me. So, I dialed it back a little bit. So, So that did wonders for me, and then I was also seeing an acupuncturist at the time, and she recommended, a tincture, which is also in that list, and I started taking the tincture, and that helped me also sleep through the night, and then about 2 years ago, I felt like I was having trouble sleeping through the night again, and another friend recommended something that has a lot of herbs that have been known for centuries to help women, and so I started taking that. Again, these are all in the BYWD menopause. That was a Nature's Way formulation. It has a morning pill and an evening pill, and none of the herbs that I take overlap. There's no Vitex in either of those formulations. In the tincture has its own thing compared to the other things. So I thought, "Okay, I'm just gonna take all of these herbal supplements," and I have essentially been symptom free. However, the one question that was in the back of my mind this whole time has been, "Okay, great, I'm symptom free," but Dr. Mosconi in this book, The XX Brain, explains that there's a 10-year window after the end of your last period. So let me just clarify. Menopause is defined as you have not had a period for 12 months in a row. The long period before then, when your hormones are shifting, is known as perimenopause, and it can last 10 years or longer. What the new menopause was saying that it could be from as long as 12 and a half years with or without symptoms. Okay. So basically, your hormones are decreasing, probably, who knows, somewhere in your 30s at some point, but you don't start to really notice the changes until, let's say, in your 40s. That's why I say, if you're approaching 40, read this book. Hey, if you're approaching 30, maybe you want to read this book. It's very important reading. So one thing that was not clear to me, so in the XX Brain, she talks about how in the 10 years after menopause, so perimenopause is this long marathon, and then you hit the finish line, menopause, and then starting from that point, you have a 10-year window when you can do things that can protect your brain. Because the XX Brain talks about the fact that 2/3 of Alzheimer's patients are women, and that there seems to be a correlation between our hormonal changes and cognitive decline. Ugh, right? When I read that, I was like, "Ugh." Because the reality is if you hit a certain age and you have ovaries, you're going to hit menopause, right? Some of us have had children, some of us have not had children, whatever. We will all go through menopause if we reach a certain age, okay? And this has been going on, as long as there have been women. So, the fact that there's all this new information is really radical because they are just finding that our hormones do so much more than allow us to bear children, right? Brain fog, muscle, uh, energy level, all these things. So she talks about the opportunity in that 10-year period after menopause to protect the brain with HRT. HRT stands for hormone replacement therapy. Some people are referring to it as MHT, menopause hormone therapy. It's just hormone therapy, okay? And because my symptoms, and I'm using air quotes for anyone listening to the podcast, because my symptoms have been managed with the herbs, I didn't know if the hormone therapy was still something I needed to consider. And so when I saw the M Factor documentary, I read the XX Brain like 2 years ago maybe. When I saw the M Factor documentary this week, and then I read the new menopause book this week, it made it very clear to me that I want to investigate hormone therapy for me, and specifically bioidentical hormone therapy. Now, what does bioidentical mean? Bioidentical versus traditional hormone therapy, they produce the same chemicals, it's just what they're produced with is different. So, I guess most typical hormone therapy is produced using animals. Really common ingredient is actually the urine of pregnant horses, whereas bioidentical tends to be produced from plants and apparently is more easily recognizable by the body. Now, there are lots of women who've had amazing results with the traditional hormone therapy. So, hey, that's great. I'm interested in looking into bioidentical, and it's also what the doctor who wrote The New Menopause recommends. So, for a couple years now, I have been asking this question, should I consider hormone therapy? And I've now decided that for me, the answer is a resounding yes. You might have heard that there was this report that came out many years ago about a concern about hormone therapy and a correlation with cancers. I'm not gonna go into that because I am not a doctor, nor do I play one on TV. If anything, I play a unicorn on TV, okay? A unicorn in perimenopause. But in the book, The New Menopause, which I will pop up again so you can see it, she talks at great length about that report showing a correlation between hormone therapy and cancers and why she thinks it's a non-issue for most of us. And I thought her argument was very compelling. So definitely read that, educate yourself about it. And, I really think that it is so important, as we say around here in BYWD land, self-care is healthcare. And it's never more evident than after reading these books and realizing, how important it is to get good sleep so that your brain can repair itself. How important it is that we consider supplementing our bodies with these hormones that interact with so many different parts of our body that we because we are living 30 years beyond our ovaries, we might need to supplement. So, that is what's been going on in my mind with regards to perimenopause, menopause, hormonal changes. It's exciting because I am looking forward to my brain working the way I am used to it working, and I'm hoping that hormone therapy will help me get there. So, I will keep you posted. In the meantime, do your research, do your reading, or listen to the audiobooks. I will say one thing, the New Menopause book, about half of the book is resources. So, the first half is her talking about why this is important. And then the second half is, if you have this symptom, consider this. If you have this symptom, consider this. And, it's like 100, 150 pages of resources. So while I'm usually all about the audiobooks, this book and the XX Brain, you probably want to buy physical copies because you're going to want to reference it regularly. Or the ebook, something where you can read it and click on the link and highlight that sort of thing. So I would recommend the actual ebook or the physical book for these two books. Okay, thank you for joining me for that part of the conversation. Now I'm going to talk about the how and the why to do a monthly review and set up your month in advance. As I mentioned, we have this 2-page, we call it a monthly course correct, because even when you are on the right path, you are going to need to course correct. And the really nice thing about doing a monthly course correct is it helps keep your goals front and center. And if you're listening to the podcast, you can get the 2-pager that I am holding up by going to tinyurl.com/BYWD course correct. Feel free to go there and get this 2-pager. Now, what I do is when I print this up, I print it up once a year. I print up 11 copies and I just put them in the pocket in my planner. I always get a pocket with a planner. A pocket with a planner. I always get a planner with a pocket. See this planner here? It has this great pocket. And so every year I print up 11 copies of our course correct and I just put it in the pocket of that planner. And by the way, this is that planner if you're wondering. I've been using this planner for the better part of a decade. It is my favorite planner. It is not a perfect planner because there is no perfect planner. And our last episode was about how to pick the perfect planner for you because the perfect planner is the one that you will use. So if you want to listen to that podcast, go to the Harness the Power of Planning podcast. It was last week's, I think it was episode 76 or 77. So go ahead and listen to that. But this is the planner that I love. and I talk a great detail about why I love this planner. Now, why do a monthly, as I said, we call it course correct? Because we have things that we are working on, goals, big goals, small goals. Many of the goals you might be working on probably take longer than a month to accomplish. And the nice thing about a course correct is it helps make it really clear to you what you've been working on this month and whether or not you want to keep doing the same thing or maybe you want to course correct. That's why we call it a course correct. And it just really helps keep your big goals front and center in your mind. The other thing it helps to do is it helps you to take a snapshot of your month in a really unbiased way. Because if you don't do a monthly course correct, for instance, let's just talk about December because December is the best example for me. I do almost nothing between December 23rd and January 3rd. It the only things I do during that time are maybe, like, bake some cookies and make some homemade eggnog. By the way, homemade eggnog, I have a 6-ingredient eggnog that is amazing. I should put that on our mailing list. I'm gonna make a note to myself right now. Add eggnog recipe. I will put that in an upcoming newsletter, so you can get that. It's, like, 6 ingredients. You will never buy eggnog again. That's how good it is. It's good enough to give away as a gift, okay? It's really good. So anyway, I pretty much do nothing but drink eggnog and eat cookies, and maybe I do a little end of year things. Like I like to darn my wool during that time because I like to go into the new year with no holes in my clothes, that sort of thing. But aside from that, I don't do much. I call myself an eggnog slug. And if I were to look back at my December through the lens of my eggnog goggles, I would think to myself, wow, you really did not do a whole hell of a lot this December. Because, I mean, do you remember what you did last week or the week before? I mean, I don't know about you, but I, I mean, I happen to remember this month because 4 weeks ago, I was in Montreal. 3 weeks ago, I was camping in Joshua Tree. 2 weeks ago, I was doing a Victorian ball and an Art Deco Halloween. So those were such big things that I remember. But usually, most months, I cannot tell you what I did each weekend because that's just how our brains work. In fact, there are a couple hundred cognitive biases that humans have, and one of them is recency, right? We tend to give more weight to things that have happened recently, partially because that's what we can remember. And so the beauty of a monthly course correct is it reminds you of all the things that you accomplished and did this month that you have probably forgotten. So it's a great way to pat yourself on the back and also to reinforce any learning you might have had because again, we're huge brain science nerds. There is something called Ebbinghouse's forgetting curve. If you do not take notes and implement on something that you've learned by 3 weeks, you basically have forgotten most of it, 80%. So, if you wanna reinforce any learning that you did this month, a course correct is a great way to capture that knowledge so that you can reinforce it in your brain and be like, "Oh, right, I did this thing. I really like that thing. I'm gonna do that some more." Okay, so the first part to a monthly course correct, so, either grab the course correct file from tinyurl.com/bywd course correct, or you can just start on a piece of paper, start writing things down because I'm going to give you the prompts right now. So, the first thing that you do in a monthly course correct is you write down your accomplishments for the month. My accomplishments. What made me happy or proud, big or small? Now, one way that I do this part of my course correct really easily is by using stickers, okay? And let me tell you, I have been a planner pretty much my whole life. It's just how I think. I have planners going back to being a teenager. However, a monthly course correct, it did not come naturally to me. I resisted it. I resisted it for a long time when I was given this idea, oh, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. However, I committed to it for 6 months, and now it's one of my favorite things to do because it really does give me opportunities to celebrate things that I would not think about if I didn't do the course correct, because I like to do things, if you haven't noticed. I like to do things, and I'm kind of like a, "Okay, I did that. What's next? Okay, I did that. What's next?" I just like to do a lot of different things. And what I love about the course correct is it gives me a moment to pause and reflect and say, "Hey, that was pretty cool. I wanna do more of that," or whatever the thing is. So, one of the ways that I made a monthly course correct a habit was by making it fun. And so I have a fountain pen that I like to use when I'm doing my monthly course correct. And you might have seen me pull out this fountain pen before because I use it a lot in my planner when I'm taking notes. It was a gift from my father, so it reminds me of my dad. And also, too, it writes like butter. So I just love writing with it. It feels good. Another thing that I do is I use colored pencils. I have this, it's an Elena of Avalor pencil case. It belonged to my daughter. However, as a brown child who grew up back when Disney princesses did not look like me, I love it, and so I kept it long after she got tired of it, and so I have it's super dirty because, she was like a baby when she had it, so she did lots of scribbling in it, but it has these colored pencils that I like to use for the second part of the course correct, the back page, which requires a lot of filling in with, this is kind of a graphical way to look at your month, but I like to use color to make it more fun. And then the third thing that I do to make my course correct fun is I use stickers. And I basically have 2 stickers that I use, and you'll see, I'm going to hold up my planner. See the hologram stars? The hologram stars help me to track my quote unquote accomplishments really easily. And so I love these hologram star stickers. I get them at Michael's. I buy them in bulk. I literally buy like 20 pages of them at a time because I love them so much. And the only other sticker I use, and this is one I just added this year for fun, is a disco ball sticker. And I do that for events when I host an event. So if I've hosted an event, that goes on that page and it just helps me to remember more easily my accomplishments. So when I am doing my accomplishments, I just look at my monthly calendar and I look where there's a sticker, and if it's not obvious to me what the thing is that it's reminding me about, then I go to the weekly page where I'll have a little more detail. And so, as I mentioned, I got together with old friends, some people I haven't seen in 20 plus years in Montreal. So I'm going to put that down as an accomplishment because it was an amazing opportunity to reconnect with people and to meet some new people as well. Now, when I say big and small, I just want to give you one example that I think will help to clarify how far you can drill down in terms of a small accomplishment. Like, for instance, another small accomplishment could be I got up at 5 a.m. multiple times this month because that's been a goal of mine, is working at getting up at 5 a.m. And so, that's not exactly an accomplishment like going somewhere or completing a work project or whatever, but it's something I said I wanted to do and I did it. That is the definition of an accomplishment. Now, another example was this one time Natasha and I were doing our monthly course correct together. And she said, "Oh, no, I'm not going to write that down." And asked her, "Tell me, what were you about to write down that you then changed your mind about?" Excuse me as I take a sip from my mud water. And she said, "Oh, well, my younger son, I took him to the dentist and he had no cavities." And I said, "Girl, that is absolutely an accomplishment because you taught him to brush his teeth. He was at an age when she still had to make sure he brushed his teeth. That is your accomplishment too." And she said, "Yeah, but," I was like, "Are you proud of that?" And she said, "Yep." And so I was like, "Write it down." Okay. So don't feel like an accomplishment has to be this big thing. Just write down 10, 15, 20 things that you are proud of that happened this past month. And so just to give you some more examples, I'm going to read you from a past monthly course correct, just so you can get an idea of some things that I've written down. So anytime I get together with friends, that definitely goes on there. Hold on, where's September? Okay, so look, this is September. I'm doing well with getting up at 5 AM, feeling like I was starting to see a difference with consistent exercise. I've really been nailing my calming bedtime routine slash sleep hygiene and going to bed early. I accomplished this, new business. I'm doing a podcast for another company, so anyway, just that started up, and so excited about that. Uh, I went to my kiddos' back to school night, and I feel like she's really thriving. I went to a clothing swap, and that was just really fun. I've been doing more stand-up comedy. I listed a couple of stand-up shows that I did. Okay? So those are some examples. So go ahead and take a few minutes and write down your monthly accomplishments. And actually, I'm going to, since this will be up as a podcast, what I'm going to suggest to people is that you use this podcast every month to just kind of walk you through your monthly review. And just feel free to, stop the podcast, take as much time as you need to write down your accomplishments, and go ahead and do that now. Okay. You might not be done, but you can come back to it. So the next. Oh, and by the way, there's a question on the course correct that said, did I reward myself for the above? Not every accomplishment is gonna have a reward to attached to it, but if you do have, let's say, some big accomplishment that you met, maybe you finished the first draft of a book, or you filled in some applications for a new job, or you investigated and applied for a mortgage, whatever it may be. Did you reward yourself? Oprah has this great saying that the more she celebrates, the more she finds to celebrate. And I've absolutely found that to be true. When I celebrate, and it can just be in a small way, like writing it down on my course correct, I feel like I see more to celebrate. It's really a practice of gratitude. And so we just put that little reminder there. Did I reward myself for the above? A reward can be as simple as napping in a hammock, or buying yourself a magazine or a new pair of socks. But for bigger things, like when I finish the draft of a book, I do a spa day. That's my big reward for that sort of thing. Rewarding yourself can be a way to motivate you and a way to celebrate your accomplishments. So feel free to comment if you did reward yourself for something. And if you didn't, maybe put a little box there to remind yourself, hey, I want to reward myself for this because this was really great and I want to really celebrate it. Okay. The next question on the course correct is my insights. What did I learn about myself and my habits? So I have had an interesting insight, which is that calming music is a really important part of my sleep hygiene routine. And let me just explain to you about my evening routine. So, the last thing I do before I get in bed is I do my skincare ritual, and I do it with a candle lit and this calming music playing. And earlier in this month, I had been really into a book, like, I couldn't put it down, and so I was listening to the book doing my skincare ritual, and I found that I was not as relaxed when I went to bed, and I was taking longer for me to fall asleep. And so I shifted back to my calming music, and it was like I could feel my stress level dropping. And so I've been committing to playing the calming music at night because it allows me to sleep better and gives me a better ritual. So that was a really interesting insight into my habits. If you have any interesting insights that you learned about yourself, please write them down now. Or if you're listening to the podcast, pause it and take a moment to write that down. Okay, the next question is, are there books, articles, or podcasts you read or listened to, and what did you learn? So I would definitely put the M Factor documentary up there. I will put the New Menopause book. And this is such a great way to capture books because maybe you want to reread something later and you don't have a list of what you had read. This is a great way to capture something that you've learned to remind yourself, like maybe you said, like, oh, there was a book last year. What was it? And you can look back at your monthly reviews and find it. That's great. Or you can write down something about, like, for instance, New Menopause book, convinced me to investigate hormone therapy. That's just some learning I wanna capture. So go ahead and take a moment and write down if there were any books, articles, or podcasts that you wanna remember that you learned something from this month. Okay, next question is my inspiration, who inspired me, who championed me. This could be someone you know, or it could be just something that you read about. I'm definitely putting down Dr. Haver, who wrote the New Menopause book. By the way, another book that I read this month, was called Hidden Valley Road, and it's about a family who had 12 children and 6 of them were diagnosed with schizophrenia. And I learned a lot about mental health and really the spectrum of mental health. Fascinating book. Highly, highly recommend. I can't go into it now because there's just not time. But I also found it very inspiring. The one of the youngest sisters, her experience in Hidden Valley Road of because she was one of the ones who was not diagnosed with schizophrenia. Her experience healing from having grown up in that family, I thought was very inspiring. So, this is the sort of thing that I write down. So go ahead and take a couple minutes and write something down or pause the podcast and do that. Okay. And then the next question is, were there any distractions, fears, or mental blocks you had this month? This is just a great opportunity to name the thing that might be keeping you from doing what you want to do. Sometimes we're not even aware of the blocks in our way. And this is an opportunity to take a moment and think about what might be holding you back and what, if anything, you want to do about that. So go ahead and stop this and write that down. Next question, my self-care, what did I do to care for myself? I did a great job of eating really well this month. I've been shifting back, if you've listened to our other podcasts, to more plant-based eating, and I have actually really been enjoying the shift. I was vegetarian for 4 years, before I got pregnant, and I actually I feel like I missed that way of eating, so that's one of the things I did for myself. So, self-care can be anything, it can be reading, it can be napping, it could be talking to friends, connecting with your community. It could be unplugging from toxic sources of information. What did you do to take care of yourself? Okay. Next question. What didn't happen and what will I do differently next month? Remember, this might not always be stick to the plan. It might mean altering the plan. So if there's something that you wanted to work on this month and it didn't happen, why? What didn't happen? Why didn't it happen? And how are you going to do it differently? For instance, I felt drained for part of this month, and I think it was the 2 trips back to back, and so I did not do as much writing as I like to do in a month, but you know what? I was drained from the travel, and I just needed more sleep. So, I am not doing that kind of travel next month, and so I anticipate that that will be different. So, think about, what do you wanna do differently next month? Okay, and then the final course correct question is, was there an overview? Do I have one key takeaway for this month? And I feel like my key takeaway is going to be around hormone therapy, although that might be because of recency. As I told you, it is a cognitive bias for humans. So, whatever your overview was for the month, go ahead and write it down. Okay, and then for those of you who have the handout, the other side is what we call an instrument panel, and it's just a fun sort of less logical way, more intuitive way of thinking about your month. And you just kind of fill it in like how you felt like you did in this pie wedge of your life. So the pie wedge says human connection, and there's 10 sort of pie pieces that you can fill in. So it's kind of basically on a scale of 1 to 10. How did you feel like you did in human connection, finances, family, health, career, personal growth, contribution, attitude? And what I think is really interesting is once you've done enough of these, you start to see kind of the rhythm of your life. Like there are very few months where that circle is blown out. Everything's great. There's an ebb and flow. Some things are good, some things aren't. And I feel like that is very calming to me to recognize that, things change and you just have to kind of learn to ride that wave gracefully. My husband and I have been married for 21 years, together 26 years. And we had one of our hardest time periods this past summer. Even after 26 years of being together, we still haven't gotten it all worked out. However, we talked about it, we figured out some stuff, and we are in a much better place only 3 months later. Like, a lot can happen in a short period of time when you're honest with each other and about what's going on. So, things ebb and flow. Don't judge. You're just making note of where you are this month, and maybe in a year, check back and see how things have changed, how things haven't changed. It's just another way of thinking about your month. The monthly tracker is where you consolidate your numbers from the weekly trackers. So if you habit track things like, did I meditate? Did I exercise? Did I get enough water? Did I work on the thing I said I was going to work on? Then this is a way to consolidate all those numbers into a monthly number. And we always say progress, not perfection. If you said you wanted to exercise 20 times this month and you got 70% of that, so whatever 70% of 20 is, I guess it's around 14 or 15, then great. That's a win. Okay. Be gentle on yourself. Progress is what matters. Hitting the goal, it's like an added bonus, but you know. And then we give you a little fun-o-meter to rate yourself on a little gas tank of how fun, because as Ben and Jerry said, if it's not fun, why do it? And then the last question is, what was my average integrity over this month? And we define integrity as doing what you say you're going to do. And so that's a scale of 0 to 10 too, because achieving your goals is not just about setting the goals, it's also about doing the things you need to do to accomplish the goals. It's two different things. So we want to help you capture, okay, great. You said you were going to do this thing, but did you actually do it? Okay, so you've done your monthly course correct. Then the next thing we would say is look at your next month. Since we're in October, that would be November. And the first thing you want to do when you are setting up your month, and we actually talked about this in great length in an earlier podcast. If you look at the podcast notes, you'll be able to find it. Otherwise, I'm going to try and see. I think we have a little, no, we don't have it here. Okay. So steps to planning your month. The first step is to write down any important dates. And when we work with our students in our life design course, we have them create what's called an important date card. And basically, the important date card includes all these things that never change from year to year, like people's birthdays and anniversaries. But it can also include other things, like, for instance, in January, I have a note to prepare tax stuff to give to the accountant. In January, I also have buy Ren Fair tickets because Ren Fair tickets start going on sale in January, even though it's not until May. So this is my little important dates card. It's just an index size card where I write down all the things that I want to keep track of from year to year. And so grab those important dates and plop them into your next month's calendar. Then I also want you, if they're not already there, let's say you also have a digital calendar where maybe things that are farther distance are being tracked that you have not put into your paper calendar. Maybe something like a work trip or a personal trip or some sort of deadline you need to meet. Transfer that into your calendar. And then once you have those things that you know need to happen or are going to happen, then you can start adding in things that you want to happen, but you never seem to have time for. So, for instance, these include things like a night out with friends or a day with friends. These include things like, oh, I've been wanting to do a yoga retreat or a writer's retreat or a silent retreat. These include date nights, mommy daughter days, daddy daughter days, you know, hey, grandparents, do you want to take the kids for a day? All those things that you say want to happen but don't seem to happen, put them in now because we always we tell ourselves this it's kind of a lie where we say like, "Oh, I'll get to that when I have time." There is no day that says, "Hey, you have time today. Do it now." You have to make time. So, put in those things that are important to you. This could also be things like I put in my Thursday sunrise hike that I do with some friends of mine. So that goes in for every Thursday. This could also include simple things like phone calls. I have friends and relatives who live out of state. And so I will plop in like, oh, call them on this day, call them on that day, call them on this day. Okay. Then the final step to setting up your month is to also put in things like that will move your goals forward. Exercise, writing, maybe research. Maybe you're thinking about moving or you're thinking about getting another degree. Okay, well, write in some time to do some research on the place you want to move to or the place where you might want to go to school. And that is how you set up your month. And just by taking that little bit of time to just give it some forward thought to think about how you want to purposefully go into the next month and the things that you want to prioritize, you will feel so much better knowing that you've taken this time to do that. We have a saying in the productivity world that for every 1 minute of planning, you save 10 minutes of doing. And I really feel like that's absolutely the case. Like once you decide that something is important and you've written it down, you just got to follow through. You've already decided it's important. Don't think about it anymore. Start to do the work. That's what the integrity is about, right? Like, okay, you're doing some time today planning. Tomorrow is where the rubber hits the road. It's the first day of the month. Now you have to start doing. But just keep walking your path. If you're on the right path, all you have to do is keep walking. But it's those little steps that you take every day that move you forward to achieving your big goals. Thank you so much for joining me today. I will see you next Thursday. And as always, if you want to re-listen to this, it will go up as the Harness the Power of Planning podcast. I will see you next week. Dream wild, wild dreamers. Thanks for joining us for the Harness the Power of Planning podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe wherever you listen.